Okay.
Come through here quickly.
Hurry, and you got to keep it quiet.
So tell me about tell me in general about this whole reenactment kind of stuff. Are you having? Is it all what it's cracked up to be?
It's a lot of work. I think it's more work in ways that I wasn't expecting it to be work, and yet it's probably not the same kind of work that I was expecting. It's new work. It's actually easier in some ways. I think it's easy to wear the clothing. I think it's easy to cook the food. I think it's physically exhausting. I just think there's a lot of juggling. I think that even it's the modern things that are confusing. It's trying to get the cars and the trucks and where they're supposed to be and all that kind of thing.
Kind of bogs you down a little bit?
Yeah, it is. It's the logistics of getting to the next place, making sure that there is water, and those were the kind of things that they were concerned about, but there were a little bit more natural ways to get. And they didn't know about germs. They could just go up to a river and drink and wash and do whatever they needed. They didn't know as much as we do about antibacterial soap and things like that.
I was a little bit emotional last Monday when you guys finally, all this preparation, it was time to leave.
It was extremely emotional.
How come?
Well, we had lived in the rain for a couple of days at that point. Hot sun, then rain, and then we finally got off, and this has been just such a huge project to get to this point. It was incredible. We really related to perhaps how they did when they left. Finally thinking that they were going to find a home. We were finally getting off on this expedition that we'd been really preparing hard for.
And has it met your expectations?
Absolutely. It's been greater in ways that I didn't realize it would be, and it's been frustrating. There have been some frustrations about it also.
What have you learned about the mystique of the trail?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably that you can't relive it. You can't completely redo it. You can't reenact it, or you can't redo it, but you can reenact it. I think you can feel a lot of the feelings, but I think any hindsight is different than foresight, which is what they were dealing with.
Are there any ghosts along the trail that you kind of feel only by walking it?
Absolutely. I remember seeing a painting once where the handcar pioneers were being pushed by spirits. I don't know, perhaps I feel like maybe we were there helping to push him on, and I used to think that those were angels that were helping him, and now I feel like that perhaps those of us who came afterwards were the ones that were helping him say, please do this so that we can have what we have.
So maybe you've been on the trail before?
There are moments that it sort of feels that way.
Is there some familiarity?
It is, and I can't tell if it's because I've heard the stories my whole life. I've got 21 direct great-grandparents who crossed the plains, and as Mormon pioneers, and I've heard the stories my whole life, and it's just part of me. And so at first I thought it was that, but I think there's a spiritual link.
Is that for just descendants, or can other people feel that?
I think others can. We've run into people who are new members of the church, or just the last 3 or 4 years, and they've said that they feel like that once they've joined the church, that this has become their heritage, that there's a literal adoption. It's the power of and the unity is there. It's joining the family. It's joining the body.
How about non-LDS?
I think that they can relate to it. I think that without totally understanding the passion and having the spiritual confirmation behind it, I think it would be more difficult. I think they can sympathize, and I think that they've got their own pioneer history. We had talked to some people yesterday who have been farming the same country just right out here for, I think he said it was the 6th generation that he's farmed the same piece of land, and he said, I can relate, and I thought he can. He can in many ways. I don't know if he can completely relate.
Was it a trail of dreams or a trail of tears?
Both. I think that it was a trail of dreams more than it was a trail of tears. I think I think that to get to any dream, there's a lot of sacrifice. And I truly believe that's where the tears came. But some of those tears, they had such an optimistic, eternal perspective that those tears were temporary. And so they ended up being tears of joy in the long run.
How about tears? I just lost my train of thought. I had a good question too. Okay, tell me about. Quickly, tell me about this ancestor.
This is Sally Stacy Murdoch, and she was 70 years old and came out with her sons. And interestingly, she was 70, but she had a 14-year-old son, and his name was Nymphus, and he drove the wagon, so she had to drive her own rig, like as we talked about. But she was a spinner, and I've started to relate to her because I do a lot of handwork, and I've begun to spin, and we kept having this feeling that I should bring my spinning wheel, and I kept thinking that to demonstrate spinning along the way wasn't terribly appropriate. I'm sure they didn't stop and spin along the way. I do know that they gathered buffalo fur from the bushes along the way and then used their drop spindles and would spin as they went. But to get out their wheel, I know they brought them, but I didn't know that and I couldn't figure out why I was feeling the need to bring my wheel. It's a flax wheel, a linen wheel, and just a couple of days before we left, we found this account of Sally Stacy Murdoch, who her life was to spin. Her life was spinning wool or linen or cotton, whatever they had, and they didn't have very much cotton. And then we knew, it was like a confirmation as to why we knew we had to bring this wheel along, just to tell her story.
It's fine, with 21 different ancestors, there's probably lots of stories you're not quite up to speed on.
There are a lot of them I didn't even know about until just before we came out, and my mother was feverishly trying to gather little stories for me and at least their personal histories, so that I could know about them along the way, so we could tell our children, so that we could have them available, so that we could relate to them a little bit.
All right. Well, we'll get to Steve.
Sounds good.
Talk to me over here.
Okay, Nymphus C. Murdoch.
Tell me about one of your ancestors. Is that your age?
Yeah, my fourth great grandfather, Joseph Stacy Murdoch, had a younger brother, and he was 14 and when he crossed the plains with his 70-year-old mother, and he had to become a man pretty early because all of his brothers had gone on, and he had to drive a Conestoga wagon by himself, and he was given much of the men's duties at an early age, and he grew up fast. And I'm 14 years old, and it just kind of means something when I cross the plains after him.
So have you taken on his character? Is that who you are on this trip, or?
Not really. I'm just being myself right now. I have no idea what I'm doing.
What do you think of all this?
It's really neat to do this. I think that it's just great to be a part of this, and I'm happy it's going on.
So as you take each step along the trail, do you kind of picture yourself as one of them?
Yeah, I do. I try to imagine what they would have had to do and what they would have put up with, and yeah. Has it been easier or harder than you thought? Give and take a little, but I think that it's been hard in some ways I didn't think, and easier than I thought it would be in other ways. Is it fun? Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You just have to find your own fun, you know. You have to have fun doing it.
You think that's what the kids did? They tried to find some fun along the way?
Yeah, I think so.
So what kind of fun have you learned? You learn any new games or anything?
Yeah, we play all sorts of games with sticks and iron rings, and we make fishing poles and bows and arrows and do all that stuff.
You have to use your imagination, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure that they didn't have much time because they had a lot of chores to do. But when they did, they just imagined new games and played new things.
This is gonna. Are you keeping a journal?
Yeah, I am.
Tell me about it.
I'm just writing what happens to me, so that maybe later I can read it and look up, think back about that.
Do you think it'd be valuable to your kids later?
Yeah, I do. I think that someday they'll be reading it and say, "Boy, I'm glad he kept a journal and could have something that he had." Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's all we have sometimes of these people. Just
Yeah.
the words.
We've got, our family has a few journals of ancestors, and when we read them, it's really neat.
What's your full name?
Benjamin Stephen Sorensen.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Been so dedicated can long endure. How's that work?
You got the whole thing memorized?
Pretty close.
So,
Yes.
tell me, we have a little clip of you guys having a prayer before you left the first day, and you said, "Thank you for our problems." What do you mean?
Well, I think that we're able to learn a lot through our troubles, and we knew well in advance that unforeseen difficulties would come along as we went about this adventure, and frankly, we're grateful for those things. I think it's in those in overcoming those problems and in overcoming those troubles and dealing with them that you gain a little experience and you gain a little growth, and you're able to see a little bit beyond those troubles next time they come up, so that they cease to be problems.
Do you think we've got, in our modern day and age, we've got the safety issue and the health issue as far as we know how to prevent death a
Yeah.
little more,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't foresee those little problems and those little temptations along the way.
Now it's difficult as well, and so you plan for contingencies, and you hope that as you've gone through your planning to do something like this, that you've looked ahead, you've created a number of scenarios in your mind that you have at least procedures laid out for that. But you're absolutely right. It's impossible to foresee trouble that you might have with camp, trouble you might have with modern vehicles, with wagons, with animals, all sorts of things. And frankly, we've experienced quite a bit of all of that.
You have to learn how to be resilient.
Yeah, and that's something I have to work on almost hourly. You can ask those around me that I have to kind of steel myself up a little bit. It would be very easy to become discouraged if you were in a situation where we did not have the hope that we do in modern times. If you didn't know the distance you would travel every day, if you didn't know you were going to a place that had water or that had good feed for your animals, if you didn't know whether you could count on the weather, and you didn't have Doppler radar and satellites and all sorts of imaging that gives us a pretty good idea a week in advance of what we are to expect, all those things would tend to erode your hope and make you discouraged. And I think that it's a tremendous credit to those people who went before that their faith buoyed them up, that they saw this as something that was bigger than themselves, and that Zion was there in the valley, and that's what they were headed for.
The 49ers went for gold. Was that their goal?
Was their goal Zion? Yes, I think so. I think that they had attempted it wherever they had stopped and spent any period of time, and they'd been promised not only by their fallen prophet but by their present leader Brigham Young that if they had some time in a place by themselves that they could make it come true, they could make it happen, and they were going to go to a place where no one would bother them because it would simply be too inconvenient. And Brigham Young himself prophesied that given 10 years in this valley by ourselves, that they'll never be able to dig us out. And I think that that's exactly what happened. They went searching for Zion in a place in the wilderness, beyond the Iowa Territory, beyond the Platte River Valley and the Nebraska Territory, to a place that was Mexican territory, someplace well away, and that's what they sought to establish. Absolutely, that was their driving goal.
Was it necessary for? Was it necessary for the people to suffer like they did in order to establish Zion?
Well, I think that you can take that from a couple of different angles. If you were to take a spiritual angle on that, the Lord has told us in Scripture that He will temper His people, that He will try them in all things, and I think that is part of the process that builds this sort of folk, this sort of hardy frontier folk that overcome problems, that step forward, and that continue on. And we haven't reached that level yet. There are probably few of that breed around here. I think we have a few of them with us on this trek, and that is so settling and so nice to see. But for the rest of us that have to try to find that in ourselves, it's a daily battle. It's a daily struggle.
There's a conflict of personalities even on this trek.
Absolutely, and I mean that's part of the interesting thing of life, I think, is getting along with the people that we're placed with and that we're forced to have to deal with on a daily basis, whether that's family members or friends or co-workers. And it's no different here. It was probably no different there. And you just have to skim journal accounts to understand that people have different views of all sorts of things. So yes, there are personalities here, and they're very, very headstrong, simply because that's the kind of breed, I think, that are involved in this sort of a thing. And it's been nice as everyone, despite their differences, has tried to come together to see a bit of unity come out of this.
What have you discovered from the trail? You've read about it, you've prepared for it. What have you discovered from the trail so far now that you've been on it?
Well, there's a reality to it. There's a reality to being on the ground. I think that the trail has a memory all its own as well, and I think that walking the ground or riding the ground tends to begin to transfer a little bit of that. I think you can read a whole lot about it, but until you bend down and feel the earth and walk upon it, the experience doesn't quite transfer. And I think when you sense the reality of 15 miles a day, it transfers that vision to you just a little bit.
Are you having any fun?
Absolutely, you bet. You know, this, despite the hard work and it's bone-tiring effort, it's a great time. And the fun thing about it is that we're doing this with a whole bunch of folks who share the same goal, who want to get this train through. And I think that in a way that was the pioneers' goal, to come together as a community and to get that train through, to get to the valley, and to meet your fellow saints that were there or those that would be coming later. So heck yes, it's a lot of fun.
Is this just an LDS thing?
No.
The trail?
No, in fact, it's been satisfying to learn that this trail is part of this country. It has its own place in the westward expansion of our country, but at the same time, it's part of everybody's front yard here. When we rode along the trail here, riding into smaller towns like Fremont and Schuyler, and you see the folks sitting out in lawn chairs on their front lawn, butting up next to the old Mormon Trail, and and waving as we came by. This is part of their history. This is part of their roots, and to see these communities that will seem to come out of nowhere in small towns of 4,000 and 5,000 people, it seems like we've got most of the town coming by to visit us and to wish us well, and to get a sense of the scope of this project. It goes far beyond any one religious persuasion.
Who owns the trail? Who does it belong to?
Well, that's a tough one. I think that I think the trail has its own past. It has its own memory, and I think that it belongs to everyone here. It belongs to America. It helped open up a road that led to westward expansion. It helped open up a road that facilitated a journey of faith, and I think it led to completeness here in this nation to a great degree. I don't think any one particular people own it, but it is there and it is real, and the reality of that becomes more clear as we travel along it.